live talks separately, of course. First, I'll hand over the stage Burcak Unsal, attorney at law, Unsal Law. Please give him a big, warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this lovely event. And I'd like to thank Erhan and his team for putting together this marvelous event and those who contributed in this event. Today, I'd like to talk about compliance beyond regulations. Actually, I prepared another presentation last week, but after what happened at FTX, I thought that we should focus not merely on the regulations and what the regulations require, but we have to focus on exactly how we should comply, what we should do, the best practices, and how to avoid certain wrongdoings, despite the fact that all these companies are actually regulated and equipped with not only, but with many licenses. Because, as you know, FTX itself had 4 or 5 different licenses in the US. Some of them are money transmission licenses, Bank Secrecy Act licenses, and exchange, derivative exchange-related licenses. Although they had all these licenses, and by the way, in multiple jurisdictions, like in the US, in the Singapore, and what have you, they still went bankrupt. Then we have to acknowledge the fact that this is not only about the licenses, and this is not only about regulations. And the things that I will discuss will not only relate to the cryptocurrency exchanges, but they will also relate to the token generating people, the teams, and the professionals working for these teams and for the exchanges. No amount of regulation can eradicate wrongdoing. First of all, this is a very important aspect. If it were, then we wouldn't be talking about the banks getting sanctioned by OFAC or by other regulatory authorities. But since the beginning of the banking and financial regulatory institutions, we have seen time and time again the banks and other financial institutions have been subject to very severe sanctions, and sometimes their licenses are suspended. In other words, even the most heavily regulated financial industry cannot eradicate the wrongdoings within its own circles. The other fact is that if there is more regulation, if we try to tackle the wrongdoings with more regulation, it means we will lose the edge about agility. But we want especially our industry to be agile, to be able to move together forward with technology and with new business that we can later tokenize, not to issue the token as a business, right? And of course, the more regulations, there's less room for development. We have just heard about our colleagues from banking industry, and they have all agreed on just one thing: predictability, clarity, and the need for regulation. Of course, we want regulation. But if there's no regulation, or if there's not enough regulation, we still have to be able to navigate these waters. And this is what we have been doing for some time in Turkey. By saying we have to be able to achieve compliance beyond regulations, I don't mean that we don't need regulations, just the opposite. I am saying that we need the regulations. But the regulation must be specified in certain aspects. It must specifically target the sensitive practices about, for example, what an exchange can do with the money that has been entrusted to it. It has to correctly guide the professionals. Do this, do that, if you do this, even better type of things. And this has to be supplemented by regulatory authority decisions. In other words, regulations is not only the text that is reduced down to regulations and statutory provisions. The regulations should safeguard the industry health. In other words, let's say in FTX, there are many other exchanges and many other service providers who have been keeping cash and token with FTX. But when it went bankrupt, filed for Chapter 11, whether the tokens within their wallets constitute bankruptcy estate or not. There's no clear guidance on this. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a position to look at Chapter 11 law rather than fintech or crypto-related regulations and licenses. Another thing is there must be certain impositions to educate the professionals and the traders. For example, everybody is saying that we have to keep our wallets or tokens in our own wallet, but not at the wallet of the exchange. Yeah, but easier said than done, because there are many people who are not, let's say, tech-savvy enough even to download MetaMask. If you say, okay, well done, they shouldn't enter into this realm, that wouldn't be the right position for our own industry. We should be able to bring all those people, and we have to find answers to those unbanked populations in the world and the pockets of society. Another thing is the regulation should be clear and predictable enough. If you do A, then the B happens, or if I do A, then I know that will happen or this will happen. And of course, we have to be able to remove the individual discretion. In other words, it should be up to the system. It should be up to the corporate structure to carry out certain actions, to carry out certain transactions, and it shouldn't be up to the CFO of that company or CEO of this company to use their personal discretion, let's say, to take decisions about the money or the tokens entrusted to us as a custodian. But can we still achieve compliance without the regulation? First, I told you about why we need the regulation, and I said that I want the regulation, as probably all of us. But can we still achieve compliance without regulation? I believe we can. And that's why, as a lawyer, sometimes I really cannot agree with the rest of my colleagues and the representative of the incumbent industries, such as the banks. Because in Turkey is the best example. And before it was regulated in the US, or before it was regulated in the EU, and now MiCA is upon us, as you know, probably it will be issued before the year end, there have been many very good examples of token projects. There have been many good examples of exchanges, crypto exchanges. I don't want to give any name. This one is doing a good job, so on and so forth. But there are, and probably you know who they are as well. That's why I believe if we take into consideration the requirements of the existing applicable legislations, and if you learn from other heavily regulated industries, beginning with the banks and capital markets, then I believe you can have pretty much a very good idea about what you should do and what you shouldn't. And with what kind of professionals you should work and what kind of fiduciary duties you normally have. So, how can we comply with the existing regulations? Because there are regulations all over the place. If you want to do this business in the US, you have to get several licenses. If you want to work in the EU, unfortunately, you have to get the license from each and every EU country itself. And if you want to work in South Korea, Japan, Turkey, Australia, United Kingdom, or England, now that they exited the EU, unfortunately, it's a mess. Is it required? Yeah, maybe, because if you want to open a bank in one of those countries, you still have to get a different bank license, right? Or a money transmission license, or a mobile payment system licenses, or an electronic virtual currency license. Yeah, but this has a global aspect to it. This is an exchange. And under normal circumstances, the nature of the business is to allow everybody, especially the less those with less opportunities and those with less banks to be able to use their very little saving, very little amount of money in a project about which they have been well informed, transparently. And as long as the project and the exchange do that, there shouldn't be legal problems or obstacles to prohibit these people from having access to this kind of investment or this kind of saving or this kind of payment systems. So, how can we remain compliant and vigilant even without regulations? In the world, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the country, and even depending on the different regulatory agencies within the same country, let's say CFTC versus Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, there are three main approaches. Number one is prohibition. The most important global giant doing this is, as you know, China. The other one is regulation. All the countries that we have been talking about have regulation this way or that way, and do no harm approach. For example, CFTC in the US has this approach, and I believe Turkey has this approach. Because, surprisingly enough, Turkey, although a very important market for exchanges, very important market for traders, or a country for traders, still doesn't have a particular legislation detailed enough to govern this industry. As you know, we only have in Turkey a regulation issued by the central bank prohibiting use of crypto tokens for acquisition of services and goods. In other words, you cannot pay Bitcoin to obtain services and goods. Another prohibition in Turkey is if you want to deposit cash into your exchange account, you can use only the banks, no other financial institutions. But due to this lack of regulation, the banks themselves have come up with several compliance requirements for their customers. And depending on their perception of risk, they are requiring different capital levels or a different questionnaire depending on who they will work with. And of course, indeed, there are banks in Turkey who are opening nodal accounts, in other words, customer accounts for these exchanges. Yeah. Let's skip this one. I'm trying to be mindful about the time here. Anyway, if you want to be compliant in countries like Turkey, or if you want to be compliant, do the right thing, despite the fact that we have license, we have to follow certain things. These are not exhaustive. These are only examples. For instance, a GSM operator level or a bank level data security system, catastrophic backup system, cyber security system, and technological infrastructure, then it would pretty much be the same as what they require from the bank, and you would be good to go. So you don't need anybody else to tell you what kind of safeguards you have to take from a technological point of view. Another one is KYC, AML, KYT, Know Your Transaction, and CTF programs, counter-terror financing programs. We already have defense system here. We already have public auction, public tender system. We already have banking system. We already have OFAC regulations and requirements. Then why do you need your own country or somebody to tell you what kind of precaution to take about this? You have to follow up this system. You can outsource it. You will keep the documents, and you will, if required, provide the relevant documentation to the relevant regulatory agency, MASAK in Turkey. Then again, you are good to go. Maintaining appropriate records, reporting, efficient customer relations. If somebody has a complaint about you, you should just pick up the phone and answer the question. And you should gather and share information about the originators and beneficiaries of crypto transactions. Where is that token coming from, to whom it's going, and under what circumstances? Basically, the things that are required for FinCEN registrations, money transmitters, payment services, custodial services, e-money issuers, and capital markets. You look into these, you know these very well. Consult a lawyer who knows these very well, and you can come up with your own best practices and your own compliance safeguards, even if your country has not issued any clear regulation about this. And there's also, of course, the contractual aspect. You should make sure that you don't touch the money of your customer in a way or in an unauthorized way. The way you should use the money, it should be made clear to the customer. And here are the things that you should avoid. Buying and selling vis-a-vis the customers, using assets in custody for financial transactions, engaging with leverage transactions. I'm not saying that you should totally avoid these, but if you will do this, there has to be a clear contract and the boundaries of how to do it and with whom to do it. Using funds in custodial accounts as investment fund, so you get all the money and deposit it as a fund, and then you reap the benefit and give it back as a revenue. Or providing or committing interest revenues. There are some business models like that, but don't forget, these things are only for the banks to do it in all the world. And even if you will list tokens, and you have to list tokens, you have to make a good due diligence in terms of what the category of the token is. And as a rule of thumb, they are almost always, unfortunately, security tokens. And if you think they qualify as utility token, you have to make sure from a legal point of view. My time is up, I think, so I will just finish my line and my time with the initial coin offering and token-related projects. What I have been telling you is applicable for all ends of this industry. If you are a token generator, or if you're a professional in any of these kind of business models, you have to pay attention to the legal status and category of your token. I know everybody would like to say we are utility tokens, but 90% of the time you are not. And 90% of the time you still would be better off not, let's say, entering into the US market. So you have to pay attention to this. Another one is people due diligence. You have to appoint your professionals, you have to appoint your manpower in a way after you did the due diligence with respect to their training, with respect to their experience, and with respect to their criminal background. You have to always run technical audits on your project, on your exchange, and everything. Not only once, but on frequent basis. You have to run financial audits and make it transparent. And finally, you have to be able to report it to the relevant regulatory agencies and to your users and customers. Thank you very much for your patience to have followed me. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to respond at the recesses. Thank you.